Have you ever wondered why Jesus, a man born in the Middle East thousands of years ago, has been famously portrayed as a white man? Well, I'm about to tell you, but you gotta stick with me. Good evening, Alex Star Nation. I recently saw this clip of Good Omens come up on my For You page where it's portraying Jesus as biblically accurate Jesus. And if we now know this actor is what Jesus would have most likely looked similar to, why have we been portraying Jesus as a white man for the longest time? Now, this phenomenon dates back to where some of the most famous pieces of biblical art come from, and that is the Renaissance era. Think about The Last Supper, Pietà by Michelangelo, any Madonna and Child painting. These are pieces that are highly revered and where we most likely get the idea of Jesus being a white man and portrayed as a white man. During the Renaissance, artists were really preoccupied with making their pieces look like the world around them, so they were using contemporary models, contemporary places in order to model their pieces after so they would look more realistic. Biblical figures like Jesus and Mary were often put in contemporary Italian settings and contemporary Italian clothing, and they looked like contemporary Italian people because who was in Italy during the Renaissance? White people. Now, what they were doing is called anachronism. I'm about to read you the definition. An anachronism is a person, object, or concept placed outside of its appropriate historical time, often causing a clash with the setting's era. But they weren't doing this because they were just unaware of history and they didn't know what Jesus looked like, but it was often intentional. Like I said before, since a lot of artists during the Renaissance were really preoccupied with making their pieces look more real and feel more real, they often modeled the things that were in their pieces on the world around them. And it made the scenes that they were painting more understandable to the average viewer. It also had a religious purpose, because a lot of people back then largely were illiterate. So one of the ways to pass on biblical stories and biblical teachings was through art. So they put Jesus and Mary and the apostles and all these saints and biblical figures in contemporary clothing, in contemporary settings, and made them look like contemporary people so they would be easier to understand and empathize with. So even though realism and making these pieces feel as if they were just a part of the contemporary Italian world was a big motivation for the artists at the time, historical accuracy was not really at the forefront of their minds. Now, the idea of commissioners and artists wanting people to be closely connected to and empathize with Jesus comes from Saint Francis of Assisi. Followers of Saint Francis were called Franciscans, and the Franciscan ideology heavily emphasized forming a personal, emotional relationship with Jesus. So a lot of the art that was commissioned by the Franciscans or inspired by the Franciscan ideology at this time wanted people to connect with Jesus personally. It's easier to empathize with somebody who looks like you, comes from a similar background, maybe within your community. It's just easier to empathize with people who you can relate to personally. So if Jesus, looks like your brother or your son, it's easier to empathize with him. If Mary looks like your mom, it's easier to empathize with her. So at the end of the day, a lot of these images weren't necessarily about historical accuracy, but they were more focused on getting people trying to better empathize and personally connect to Jesus. And it's not like the Renaissance artists were unaware of the past. They knew what the fuck was going on in the past. They were really obsessed with Greek and Roman art. But the main point is that they weren't trying to recreate historical accuracy. Like, think about a show like Stranger Things. The show is set in the 80s. So the actors, they're dressed like they're from the 80s. Their makeup is done like they're from the 80s. Their hair is from the 80s. The pop culture references, they're from the 80s. The way that the scenes and the backgrounds and the setting is set up is like it's from the 80s. That is something that is fairly modern. That's a fairly modern idea, trying to accurately depict the past when we are in the present. Even now, we're not doing it like 100% accurately. Stranger Things kind of goes all in on the 80s nostalgia in order to give us a more 80s feeling. And that is done on purpose in order to get an emotional reaction out of the viewer. So Jesus wasn't painted white just because Renaissance artists didn't know Jesus was brown. It says in the Bible that he's brown. They know who's brown. But he was painted that way in order to get people to better understand his suffering, in order to have a more personal and close connection with him. And I still think we do this nowadays. I'm Black. If you're Black, I'm pretty sure you've seen a Black Jesus or two in your lifetime. I just want y'all to remember that whenever we look back at a lot of Renaissance paintings, a lot of them don't really show truth of what was going on back in the day. I could talk more about that later, but I'm just explaining to y'all why Jesus is white.